Hi, this is Jennifer Corey with Heart Initiative, and I want to welcome you to this episode of Living with Heart. Today, I have the absolute privilege of introducing you to Dr. Karen Reivich, who was one of my instructors at the University of Pennsylvania when I was getting my graduate degree there in applied positive psychology. So really, this is such a thrill for me to have Karen here with us today. She is, I'm looking down so I get it all right, she's the Director of Training Programs at the Penn Positive Psychology Center and the lead instructor and curriculum developer for the Penn Resilience Program. She's also an instructor at the Positive Psychology Program, as I've already mentioned. Sorry, something just came up on my screen. And she is a leading expert in the fields of resilience, depression prevention, and positive psychology. She has extensive experience in the science and training of resilience and positive psychology principles, and she's co-authored 2 books on resilience and optimism, including The Resilience Factor: 7 Keys to Finding Your Inner Strengths and Overcoming Life's Hurdles, which is one of my seminal texts on resilience that I've been using for years. I was just telling Karen that if I had that book here with me, it happens to be sitting in my office, she would see how well worn it was. Dog-eared and highlighted and all that. It's an absolutely incredible book, and I can't recommend it highly enough. Karen's work on resilience in the military, in fact, was one of the inspirations for my starting Heart Initiative. I figured that if the military could benefit from resilience building to navigate high stress environments, then so could those of us who are dealing with ongoing health or other challenges, conditions, stressors in daily life, battles of a bit of a different kind. So Karen, thank you so much for joining us today. I can't think of a voice that is more important to be hearing from at this particular juncture in life. We're in the middle of dealing with a pandemic called COVID-19 for anybody maybe who wasn't aware. I can't imagine there's anyone in any corner of the world that doesn't know that. And so I'm thinking that the topic of resilience and understanding a bit about what resilience is and how it can be developed is just so paramount to the conversations that we need to be having at this time. So let me start by just asking you if you could begin with a definition of resilience. What does it mean to be resilient?
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for inviting me to join your work. So there's lots of different ways to think about resilience. The way I like to describe it, and I've changed the language I use over the years, but the way I like to describe it now is it's the ability to navigate challenges and adversity, and not just navigate, but also to grow through those challenges and adversity. And one of the word that I've become more a fan of right now in my work is navigate. I think I used to, probably when you were a student at MAP, I probably said words like bounce back, which is, fine. It's a common way that we all think about resilience. But what I realized is what I like about the word navigate is that when you navigate, whether it's, in your car with a GPS or you're out in the forest with a compass, old school, that we understand that navigate requires tools, that we tap into and access tools, either inner resources or external resources. And that I've come to really appreciate through studying resilience, how that's really at the heart of it. It's the ability to tap into the resources that we all have to navigate what the challenges in front of us.
Yeah, I love that you've changed that wording, evolved it a bit, because I think a lot of people think of resilience and they think of it primarily as an outcome. They don't really think of it in terms of a process. And when you use that word navigate, that's exactly what you do, don't you? You make it something active and engageable that somebody is doing in the midst of the stressors that they're dealing with.
Right. I love that. Right. And I think that's a really important point, Jen, that it is an active process. It's a process, it's not the destination or the outcome. And also that it's volitional, right? That one of the other things that kind of interests me about resilience is that, like most things, one size doesn't fit all. There's so many different resources that we can tap into that build our coping and our hardiness and our ability to navigate adversity. And we don't all have to use the same resources, but we all have volition in tapping into the things in us and in our communities and in environments that help us move through challenges like what we're all dealing with now with the pandemic. So I think
So
that's,
when you say volition, you mean somebody's drive and their innate capacity, maybe what we would call agency? Is that?
yeah, that's a great word, agency, that it's, the language around this is always interesting to me. So, I think there's language around resilience that's outdated. Like the early work, was sort of described it as like in people as invincible. There's something really unique and special about people who could navigate adversity. And I think, now we understand that some of the capacities, or I in my work, let's use the term skills, because these are attributes and techniques that we can develop, but that they are attributes and techniques or skills that if we put our mind to them, we can enhance or strengthen the muscles that enable us to be resilient. And that's agency, which I think is a big part of resilience, is staying, keeping clear in our own understanding that even when there's a lot outside our control, right, that there's always something within our control. And that gives us a sense of agency that can help prevent helplessness and despair and so forth.
So that's such a perfect dovetail into this next question, which is, I think that there was a time where we believed, listen, you were either born with it or with certain levels of resilience, or you weren't. It was sort of like that. And now we look at resilience a bit differently. Can we talk a little bit about innate resilience and developed resilience, and what some of the qualities are that reflect, what some of the circumstances are that kind of help us to build?
Sure. So I mean, I think it's fair to say that just like probably almost any trait that we could name, there's some degree of heritability that contributes to that trait, whether we're talking about resilience or optimism or name a trait. But like most traits, resilience is one in which there are many aspects of what build it, and I'll name them in a second, that we can actively develop. So some of the things that we know from the research literature, and the language I'm going to use is sort of the language that I've adopted. It's not sort of the technical language, but self-awareness, being able and willing to sort of glance inward and check, how is this all working for me? Are my thoughts, emotions, physiology, are they helping me in this situation, or are they getting in my way?
Mm-hmm.
Self-regulation, the ability to change those things I just named. Optimism, which is something that is work that at Penn at our center we're really deep studiers of. That's a key component of resilience. So those are some of the protective factors. There's also things like being part of a community or a culture that reinforces some of these traits or factors that we know build resilience. Strong relationships. So Jen and I share a mentor, Chris Peterson, who is one of the leaders of the field of positive psychology. And Chris used to say, and other people matter. And we know that at the heart of resilience is strong relationships. So all of these things, and this is just a short version of a longer list, but all of those things I just named are things that we can cultivate in ourselves to enhance our well-being and in our resilience.
Is resilience more like gas in a gas tank, or one of those hybrid engines, meaning that the more you use it, the more you're depleting it, and then you've got to pull over it sometime and rebuild it? Or more like one of those hybrid engines where as you're running it, it's charging itself at the same time? And what is the differentiating factor between those?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're great with metaphors. I think both are true. So I often describe resilience as a muscle, and that if you're not practicing that muscle, it's going to atrophy. But also, like a muscle, if you're working it and working it and working it, to keep it strong, you need to recover. You need to build in time for recovery. And so when I teach about resilience and do workshops or talks on the topic, one of the core messages that I think is really important is that we all understand that it does work, that recovery, whether you use the word recovery or rejuvenation, or there's so many different words we could use for this, but having a set of strategies that you use that help replenish you is a critical part of resilience. None of us, I mean, sometimes I think some of the myths around resilience can get in our way. For example, like either you have it or you don't, which is something you alluded to, or that it's like that it is a sort of a commodity and that it doesn't need tending to. And I think of resilience as a quality, a set of, build on a set of features or protective factors that we have to tend to, just like we would tend to any other part of our health. I sometimes, will make the example that you don't brush your teeth once and say, yep, I've got great dental hygiene. We do it several times a day, or many times, at least a couple times a day. And I think resilience is the same, that we have to tend to it.
Mm-hmm. So how in a time like this, when people are actively having to use resilience, let's say that maybe somebody hasn't spent a lot of time tending to it, or they have, but they burnt through a lot of it in the first week because the levels of stress were very heightened maybe for people earlier on. I've referred a few times now in talking to people about this between the first week, the second week, the third week, in what we call like a little bit of a weariness that can start to set in.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that that is not different from the things that you have to teach soldiers, for whom they don't just go and on day 1 through 5 have to deal with something difficult and then get home to go home. A lot of times they're having to draw on that resilience even in the midst of trials and challenges. So what are some of the things that we can offer people here today who maybe continue to feel the weight of the stress? Maybe it's kids at home, maybe it's symptoms of an illness coming very close to their own home, themselves or family members. Maybe they're dealing with a loss right now. And yet we still have to continue to function during this time for at least the short-term foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So what are some specific recommendations that we might be able to offer to people?
So, I mean, I think that the beauty of the field of resilience is that there are so many different ways that we can bolster ourselves and keep ourselves sort of healthy and, kind of continuing to trudge forward, even when there's like these long periods of uncertainty and stress. And so I'll name a few. And I think one of the messages I'd like to kind of put out there is like, people should just experiment. Like what works for me, and I'll share what works for me, might not work for you, and might not work for some of your listeners, but we can all figure out what does work. So one of the things we know, and this is work that you know well, is the value of positive emotion in keeping us hardy in the face of stress. And so as right now, as we're all going through seeing, so in some ways it feels like our worlds are kind of got a lot smaller because, many of us are not leaving. I haven't left my home and property, I think, in about 4 weeks at this point. So my world's gotten a lot smaller. One of the ways that we can sort of help kind of, again, sort of push back the horizon of our worlds a bit and bolster ourselves is through positive emotion. So we know that people who make it a habit of finding moments in the day that create a feeling like joy or gratitude or contentment, or for me, the emotion that really sustains me and builds my resilience is the emotion of awe. When I see beauty, and I've never asked myself the question, what's beautiful here, and not been able to answer it, genuinely answer it. And so I'm in my home office on the 3rd floor, and if I look to my left, I can see the last bit of bloom on the magnolia tree in my yard, which we planted when we moved to this house about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And for me, during this time of not leaving the compound, I make it a habit of every day starting my day by looking at the blossoms, and I end my day by looking at the blossoms.
Yeah.
And so for me, awe or beauty fills me up. For you, it might be gratitude. For one of your viewers, it might be curiosity. Like when they feel curious, they feel alive and strong. And so one challenge I like to one strategy I like to challenge people with is, what can you do today, maybe several times across the day, that helps you feel that fullness from a positive emotion? And that's a great strategy for building resilience. We know that through the research that Barb Fredrickson and others have done, that positive emotion builds resilience. So that's one. Another strategy is around optimism. I've already mentioned optimism. And so one of the key skills, traits, however you want to describe it, I think of it as sort of the engine of resilience, is building and maintaining a sense of optimism, even when things aren't 100% cheery. And I think people sometimes confuse optimism with either the ostrich with his head in the sand, pretending bad things aren't happening, or like this idea of like, it's like a vapid worldview. It's like rainbows and butterflies and unicorns. And neither of those are true. That optimism is a serious-minded, critical thinking skill. And one of the things that we do really well when we're in an optimistic mindset, and this is what folks can practice as a technique right now, is to ask the question every day, and maybe it's every hour, what's one thing I can control now? What purposeful action can I take now? And whether that is, getting on this call with you and getting to talk about work we both love, or it's cleaning out my kitchen utensil drawer. Like, both of those things are purposeful action. And when I engage in purposeful action, I feel more optimistic because look, I'm controlling my slice of the world. I have efficacy, agency, and that builds my optimism and that builds resilience.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two really simple strategies, Jen, that people can use. There are others. I mean, another one that I think is really important right now is tending to our relationships. So, before we went live, you and I were chatting about sort of Zoom and how that's probably, I wish I had stock in it. There's so many ways right now that we can reach out to people. I celebrate Passover. And so last night, like many Jewish families, we did a Zoom Seder, and we didn't have the egg because we were out of eggs. So we put an avocado on the plate, but like that created humor and was a way to engage my mom who's not with us. And so simple ways of reach, I would challenge the folks that work with you to think about what are the small ways that I can reach out to others right now? Because by reaching out, I'm letting the other person know I care about you. And it's also filling me up by reminding me that I have relationships that can sustain me even when things are rough. So those are, sort of what I like about this field is this isn't rocket science. Like, I don't think I probably said anything that that people have thought, I never thought about that before. But sometimes it's just about reminding ourselves to do these things that we know keep us robust.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I teach this, I say to people, not once in the 8 weeks that we're going to spend together are you going to say, oh my God, where did she get that?
Right.
But I'm going to tell you things that your mother and your grandmother told you. I'm just going to back them up with science.
Yes, exactly.
Science is the new God in many ways. And that, well, if science says it, then it must be true.
Yes.
But your grandmother is sitting there banging her head thinking,
right.
Didn't I say that?
Right. We need a randomized controlled style to tell people to hunt the good stuff or to count blessings.
Yeah, there's a very funny video right now online where an Italian grandmother talks about how to manage COVID. She says it in Italian, but it's being translated. And one of the things it starts with, wash your hands. I've been telling you to wash your hands your whole life. And she says, you do not wash your hands. It's very, very funny.
Let me just interrupt and say one thing. There's a big storm that's brewing out my window with lots of wind. So if I suddenly disappear, you'll know it was nothing horrible other than we lost power or something. Okay. But
okay.
In case something goes wrong.
Thank you. Thanks so much for mentioning that. I really would have worried if suddenly you just disappeared. So one of the things that you talked about is, first of all, I ask people to take all walks right now. So specifically walking for the purpose of allowing your eyes to see the magnificent in the mundane, and how that is often only possible when we really slow down. And the things that usually slow us down are a love or suffering. And so, we have this moment in life where we're all slowed down. I have had some people come back and say, I feel kind of guilty about the fact that I'm feeling good. Is that okay? And how to navigate that piece. And I think the fact that you're sitting here saying, this is one of the essential ways in which it is one way in which we can build this essential muscle of resilience. Maybe we can let some people off the hook, those who are peaceful at home baking and happy to be doing it. My daughter is at home sewing face masks. And she said, as we spoke on Zoom briefly this morning, what century is this? In what world would I be sewing anything, let alone face masks? But I could see the peace in her face as she was doing it. And, we are go, 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 go kinds of people. So I think many times we're taken aback by kind of a little bit of the relief that this forced exile or forced stillness is creating.
Yeah.
But then I also noticed that people can feel some level of guilt around, wait a minute, there's real suffering out there. And I wondered if you could say something about the importance of holding those spaces simultaneously. I know
Yeah,
you
and
have some research about widows, right?
right. But and I think what's important in that is the acknowledgement that both things are going to be present for most of us. That there are going to be moments, certainly as we're talking now about the uncertainty of what's we're all confronting, but just in life in general, right? That there's going to be moments of suffering, and there's going to be moments of grief and struggle. And I'm somebody who's struggled in my sort of early midlife, mid to like through my 30s with shame. Like I can like drop into a good bout of shame, like over just about anything. And there would be times, maybe like some of the folks, where if I went outside and I'm a little sheepish about saying, like, noticing the beauty of my magnolia tree, because what about the people that might be watching this and don't, maybe they are finding it harder to answer the question, what's beautiful here? Am I entitled that I have that, so I can get all of that going. And then I think for me, one of the things that helps is that all of this is true, that I can both deeply appreciate the beauty of nature in front of me and also know what it's like to 10 minutes from now to feel a wave of anxiety or a wave of guilt, like, am I doing enough for my mom who's at home and I can't be with her? And that I don't have to, that part of what makes all of this stuff interesting to me is that both of those things are true, right? That it's both true that I wonder at beauty and still at times struggle with shame, and that's part of it. And that's probably true for 99% of people, that we all have moments of grace. And what was the phrase that you used? It was so beautiful when you talk about marveling.
Magnificent in the mundane.
Magnificent in the mundane. That's so beautiful, right? That we can all have moments of that, and then also have moments of suffering. And just like, I think just acknowledging, I mean, maybe this is a weird way to say it, but like, this too shall pass. Like, my moment of joy is going to pass. So I might as well enjoy it while it's present with me.
Yeah.
And then when my moment of anxiety comes, maybe not enjoy it, but notice, okay, it's here and that's going to pass too. I don't know. I don't feel like that's the most compelling answer, but I think that's what helps me, just to sort of know that we all have enough space to have all of these.
And I disagree. I think it was a very compelling answer. I think the research that I was alluding to was on resilient grief.
Yeah.
And that the most resilient grievers were a group of widows who could hold the full force of their loss in the same place that they were capable of holding gratitude for the people who were supporting them, or appreciation for the beauty of a sunset, or, in other words, one did not eclipse the other entirely.
Yeah. And that and sometimes I feel, it's interesting. I don't know if this is true. I'm interested in your thoughts, but that when it comes to negative emotion, we sort of feel like there's enough anxiety for all of us, right? Like, shame for everyone. But that when it comes to like positive emotion, that there's like this, for some of us, this like zero-sum game mentality. Like, if I'm feeling joy right now or happiness, that there's like a tiny part of me that doesn't want to share that with you, because I don't want you to think, oh great, Karen's got a slice of happiness, that my slice is smaller, or it's bragging or unseemly in some way, that in this time of struggle that so many of us are facing in one way or another, for Karen to be boasting about her magnolia tree. That there's a weird dichotomy we have between the sharing of negative emotion, and there's an abundance, but that there's like a smaller bank of positive emotion for all of us. And I don't believe that's true, but I think it raises some of that complexity.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think we often more easily can relate or find common ground in suffering and anger politically, or in, fear around something.
Yeah.
And yet, if you see people at a concert or at some moving event, or I love the research that talks about, David Yaden talks about this, that when we're in a moment of transcendence, one of the things that we want to do right away is turn to share it, right? Like we're looking for somebody with whom to, because it builds on that. So we have it on the positive side too, but maybe this is part of that mammalian brain that more readily can go to the sharing of the negative than the positive. Viktor Frankl, we have a colleague in common, Emily Esfahani Smith. She's a writer. She wrote in the New York Times a beautiful piece recently. I wish I could draw the name very quickly off the top of my head, but I had the privilege of interviewing her about 2 weeks ago. She has since written a piece about meaning in the New York Times, meaning in the midst of suffering. And she referred to Viktor Frankl, who is the Austrian psychiatrist who spent time and lost his entire family to the horrors of the concentration camp. And he coined the term tragic optimism, which I absolutely am so moved by. And it is that capacity to hold both things is true.
Yeah.
To hold the suffering and hold the hope as equally true in your life. Whoa.
That tragic optimism, and lots of people write about that in different ways. That to me is the spirit of optimism that contributes to our resilience and well-being. That it's at the heart of optimism is being able to acknowledge and see what is, and to maintain the spirit that allows us to continue to sort of persist and work towards creating something better out of what is, as opposed to those brands or sort of styles of optimism I was mentioning earlier, like head in the sand or rainbows and butterflies. I have on my computer, I'm going to pull this off. This is a little handwritten quote, but you reminded me of it. So this is Camus. It's I look at it every day. In the midst of winter, I finally learned there was in me an invincible summer.
Oh, I love that piece.
And that's like, it popped in mind as you were talking about tragic optimism, because it has the same, I think all of what we're talking about these last few minutes is about sort of the complexity and the richness of what it means to be resilient, or the word optimism, what it means to be human, and that it's about and not or. One of the things I struggle with sometimes in our field, positive psychology, is that sometimes I think we talk about things as like or, like, is it better to focus on meaning or happiness? Is it better to focus on, whatever, optimism or, positive, whatever it is? And I understand why we do that. I understand how that happens, I guess. But my sort of reaction to that at times is, maybe in one moment, what I need is to focus on happiness. And in another moment, what I need is to focus on meaning. And in another moment, what I need to focus in on is, a nice gin and tonic, and like with a really nice fresh slice of lime, like that I think, because that I think that the notion of or, as opposed to the notion of and, can sometimes inadvertently send the wrong messages, like that there's one right way. Like that's something that in the work that I try to do around resilience is like, one of the core messages I want to send is like, hey, look, there's some basic principles. You're a smart person. Make it your own. Like, there's no one right way to practice optimism, or to practice gratitude, or to be resilient. And so I think part of what I do in my work is like it's a smorgasbord. I'm going to put it all out there. It's like a big, lots of helpings of foods and drinks, and choose what feels right for you today. And know that tomorrow you might have an appetite for something else. But all of these things, trust yourself, can help contribute to your robustness and your ability to navigate.
Yeah. At Heart Initiative, we talk about it as tools in the toolbox.
Yeah.
You don't want to just walk around with a hammer all the time. Fixing a window with a hammer is really not the best strategy.
Yeah.
So the more tools that we can add, the more options and possibilities. But let me ask you this question, and if this puts you on the spot, feel free to push back. And that is, if somebody came to you today and they knew a little bit about resilience, but maybe they hadn't studied it, maybe they didn't have the privilege of studying it with you or of taking the Penn Resiliency program, and they were going off to, they were being deployed tomorrow, and said, just tell me 3 things that I could take with me as ways of maintaining and building while I'm, facing all of the uncertainty that comes. What would those 3 things be as a professor, as a mother, as a fellow human being you would want to send that young person off with?
Yeah, it's a really hard question. I mean, one would absolutely be around around understanding how precious one's energy is, and you mindfully I was using the word deploy, mindfully deploying your energy, right? So to ask yourself the question, how do I best use what I have inside me now? And sometimes that, Jen, I think takes the form of like what I mentioned before, purposeful action. Like, what's one thing I can do today that's going to help me stay connected to my own sense of agency? So that would be one. A second would be something in the relationship bucket, right? Like something around giving back or reaching out to others. I used to struggle with asking for help, and for all the reasons people struggle for action. I don't need it. I'm self-sufficient and blah blah blah. And then at some point it occurred to me, when I ask for help, not only am I benefiting, but I'm sending you. So if I ask you for help, Jen, I'm letting you know you matter, that you have something of value. I see value in you and worth in you, and that's a gift to you as much as your help is a resource to me. So my second sort of challenge would be, what's something you could be doing each day for others by reaching out to others as a way to sustain yourself, but also bolster them. And the third would be around positive emotion. And again, I think it's a dicey, it can sound like, oh, your soldiers are going off to battle and you're saying like, be happy. And that's not what I'm saying. But that positive emotions, as you know, is a broad bucket of things. Curiosity, gratitude, all, interest, there's so many. And I would challenge somebody to be on the lookout for what they can do every day that helps them stay connected to the goodness of themselves and others, and the beauty in the world, or the emotions that sort of speak to their soul.
Mm-hmm.
That would be part of it.
Yeah, and I was thinking that meaning is often the opposite of happiness. That while we're doing something that's building meaning, it often is not something that feels happy in the moment.
Yeah.
But imagine being there, knowing that about your contribution to your fellow soldiers, or in our case, even if I use the metaphor of a battle or war or a deployment as what we're dealing with right now, then our fellow family members, the little humanoids that are living with us, if we're lucky enough and maybe challenged enough to be living with people at the time.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people who are doing this on their own. I'm so glad that we started this with you talking about the magnolia tree, because there are I live in New Jersey, but I have people that I work with who live in apartments. Not everybody is in the sprawling suburbia. So the idea of using your window, was it Virginia Woolf who wrote A Room with a View?
Mm.
That idea of being able to look out and connect with the world through that window, how meaningful that is, so that even when we feel sort of housebound and unable to be outside connecting, that we're still able to look through the portal of the world in some way,
Yeah.
And to see something.
And can I add one more thing?
Yeah, please.
I think the other thing is I guess it's coming out of the conversation we were having about like feeling guilty about having positive emotion at times. Is, I think the other thing that I've come to, probably 10 years ago, if we were doing this conversation, I wouldn't have thought about this, but like the importance of understanding that resilient, like it's big enough. Like there's so many different pathways, and that that resilience doesn't mean grace under pressure. Like resilience is about kind of slogging through, and that there's not it's okay to be miserable and cranky, and that all of those quote unquote negative emotions don't mean that we're not navigating. Like navigating doesn't mean you're an explorer and you're going, you got to the place, the journey was perfect and you got where you wanted without any missteps and false starts and wrong paths. That all of that is part of what navigating is. So that there's a way in which I think we can be more gentle with ourselves and a little more forgiving with ourselves. That like that this isn't going to be a linear path, and that's okay. And so that's another part, like, whether you call that self-compassion or, a more mindfulness approach. I mean, there's so many different ways that forgiveness, grace, whatever, generosity of spirit. I sometimes think of it as benevolence, like that it's much easier for me to be benevolent towards you than it is sometimes towards myself. But that stance is part of what fuels and enables us to stay resilient.
Thank you for giving me and the viewers permission to not do this perfectly.
Oh.
That somehow if you snapped at your dog or your husband or your children today, well, then you've blown it. Clearly you're not doing this resiliently. I just wrote the word grace with a circle and a line. Yeah. Because you gave me such a breath of relief. I think the first week I was looking pretty good. The second week, not so bad. This week, I think I've snapped at a couple of people. And thanks for the reminder that when we are weary and we're going through something over time, it doesn't have to be pretty. We just got to keep going.
Yeah. I snapped at my husband right before this call, and I can tell you, give me about 45 minutes after, and there will be more snapping. Like that's how it goes. But there's also laughter, and
yeah. Well, I'm going to reference something that you guys will have to read the book to understand. But Karen, if you knew the number of times that I talked about the coasters,
oh goodness,
that I shared that story. But it gives people such permission to A, be human, and yes, B, to be able to reflect and use those moments of snapping, maybe not in the moment, but maybe sometime thereafter, as it's like a little signal that goes off. It's like an alarm that says, okay, wait a second. So sometimes I don't know that I'm overtired until I'm stress eating and cranky.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, wait a minute. What exactly is going, do you really, why 4 pretzels in a row or whatever? And I don't mean pretzel bits, people. Okay. I'm talking pretzels,
Philly pretzels.
Philly pretzels. The other thing that I think you said that I'm not sure people will have heard before, that is, it was a great reminder to me, was often we're very good at being the ones of service. And I love that. I often recommend that because it really is an antidote to depression, which is, okay, how can I serve others? It helps us to look outside of ourselves. So I recommend this all the time. I don't always remember for myself. This is why I forget to tell people, because I don't remember it for myself, how important it is to ask for help.
Yeah.
Remember that it's okay to be the one. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I think during this time of, I forget if we were talking before we went on live, but I have 4 kids at home with me and 2, and so the house has got, like, our biggest challenge is not showing up in PJs in someone else's Zoom call, but is asking for, like, how much, as I think about it, as a mom a lot, like, what are the subtle ways I'm inculcating, I hate that word, but like imbuing resilience in our, family here. And I think historically, I'm a Philly girl. I'm like, I'll get it done. Like I'm the trudge up the mountain brand of resilience. And I think as I get older and see my children, who are now, 2 of them are 22, and one's 20, and my daughter's 16. Oh my gosh, sorry, 16. That my demonstrating modeling resilience by saying, I need, like, I'm really struggling today, or this has been, like, this morning's been tough, I'm not feeling it, like, I'm just sad today, like, that those are things that I think earlier in my life I would have not wanted to be as expressive of, because I would have worried that it's not showing this like can do, I've got it resilience. And now I understand how limited that view of resilience is. And that when I say to my son Aaron, like, I'm just in a crappy mood and can you help me out here? Like that's as much a resilience message as me modeling, climbing on the roof and cleaning out the gutters, in the middle of the lightning storm, which I wouldn't do and I wouldn't advise. But you know what I mean? So like that's I think for a lot of us, the reaching out part is a struggle. When I work in organizations, sometimes I'll have organizations or individuals within organizations take a little self-assessment of like 6 sort of core attributes of optimism as part of resilience. And one of them is reaching out. Like, how comfortable are you? How often do you do it? What does it feel like to you? And that's often the one that I see a lot of people struggle with. Like, I'm great on the control the controllables, check. But then when it's like reaching out, I get squeamish and I feel uncomfortable. So I think that's an important one for us all to kind of reinforce.
Yeah. And again, this is something that in the resilience program that you do with the military, that you have to teach to people who have spent a lot of time sort of building the defenses around, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. Yeah. So I have 3 questions that relate to you directly. One you might have answered already, but I'll ask you anyway and see if you have another answer to it. And that is, what has been your best practice for navigating the last couple of weeks of life?
Best practice has 2. 1, beauty, find beauty every day. And 2, read, not academic. Like they both of them relate to the bigger question, which is the question I think we can all ask ourselves: what feeds my soul during times of struggle? And for me, it's beauty and reading. So I do those every day.
Oh, I love that. What feeds my soul? What are you most grateful for today?
Oh gosh. Oh, I'm grateful that people, as we're all that there's a feeling that I feel anyway, of that we're all kind of going through something together. And I feel connected. I'm grateful for the ways in which I feel connected to people that I wouldn't perhaps otherwise feel connected to. Like you and I wouldn't be probably doing this had we not been in the middle of this pandemic. And so I think there's so many moments of connection that I'm seeing, that I have with people and others have with others, that I'm really grateful for that.
Oh, I love that. And I share that gratitude very much. There are people that I'm connected to that I carry in my heart or are present in my work, but I don't really talk to that much. So yeah. I am so grateful for you doing this. One final question, and that is, you'll probably recognize the question, but given the circumstances exactly as they are, right here, right now, what is it that you are hoping for? Do you know where that question comes from, Karen?
I don't know where it comes from.
That's Chris Futner.
Oh.
That's his question. It was one of the most powerful questions I've ever heard anybody ask. And so I'm moved by that question.
Yeah. Say it again. I want to hear the words one more time.
Given the circumstances exactly as they present right here, right now, what are you hoping for?
I'm hoping for myself and others that we can find a way to live with some degree of ease, even during this really difficult time.
That's so beautiful. It feels like the absolutely perfect place for us to end this enlightening and moving conversation, really full with so much wisdom. And you have this way of delivering really, I think, intellectually super interesting ideas, like blended in this such a soft and maternal way. And I love that blend that you have, Karen. It's really influenced the way that I come at doing my resilience work, because you're a Philly girl, I'm a Jersey girl. So I know a lot about trudging up the hill. And there is something about bringing a certain kind of softness to this. So thank you. Thanks for modeling that. Thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you for inviting me to do this. I have to say, this has been so great. I don't know how long it's been, but I've been in flow. Um, and I love the questions you ask, because sometimes when I do talks or interviews around resilience, it gets very technical. Like the conversation, the questions I'm asked are very technical, and the questions that you asked and the conversation we had felt like it modeled the spirit of what I believe resilience is, which is bigger than trudging up the mountain. And so thank you for bringing that energy to this.
You're welcome. Well, very interestingly, that is like a boomerang effect, because a lot of that has to do with the way that you taught resilience to me when I was in graduate school. So we'll call this a full circle moment.
Yeah, that's great.
I want to tell people that you have an amazing course on Coursera. It is part of a larger positive psychology course, but you have asked, and Coursera, and I'm guessing Penn, have acquiesced and allowed you to separate that out and to provide that free to anybody who wants to take your resiliency course. I cannot imagine the circumstances under which anyone would want to miss this. Even having taken your course and being a student of resilience my whole life, it's one of my favorite courses, and I love that you've made it available to people.
Yeah.
So we're going to put the information for that right as this video is coming to an end. There'll also be information about your book, and we'll have your web address. I don't know if you have any parting words.
No, I mean, I parting words are, you know, ease, benevolence, and navigate. Like, people have it with it. I think it's just sometimes it's just a gentle nudge to remember to notice what you're already doing that's keeping you moving forward, even if you're resting at times and maybe going the wrong way at times. Just notice that about yourself, because we all have it within us. And I hope this was a nudge to notice that a little bit more.
It's a beautiful nudge. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you. Thank you.